Hello, this is Coding Gicha for full-stack developers. Up until the previous time, I covered how to set up a development environment in a Windows environment. This time, I will set up a web development environment by installing and setting up MariaDB, a web server, and development languages such as PHP, Java, Deno in Ubuntu, one of the Linux distributions. In Windows, I accessed the website, downloaded the installation files for development-related packages, and installed them through the GUI installation wizard, but most Linux distributions, including Ubuntu, can install development-related packages directly with commands in the terminal. Debian-based Linux distributions like Ubuntu provide apt as a package manager, and almost all development-related packages can be installed with apt. However, some packages may be installed with outdated versions when installed with Ubuntu's default repository. MariaDB can also be installed with Ubuntu's default repository, but a somewhat outdated version is installed. To install the latest version of MariaDB, you must register the repository provided by MariaDB. Let's choose the distribution version of Ubuntu you are using. The code name of Ubuntu 24.04 is Noble. MariaDB server versions provided for installation through the repository are rolling in LTS versions. At the time of video production, the latest stable LTS version is 11.4. 11.8 is an LTS version, but it is an RC version. Here, I will install 11.8, which is not a GA version but a more recent LTS version. I will use the default repository mirror address. If you scroll the screen, you will be presented with an installation method via a repository that matches the selected settings. You can install it by copying and pasting it into the terminal, but I will type it directly. Package that allows access to data and packages in the package manager via HTTPS and curl must be installed. I will install with apt. I will download MariaDB GPG key with curl. The official documentation mainly explains the multi-line style apt format as a method for registering MariaDB repositories, but I will register in the one-line style apt format. It is recommended to set the architecture to AMD 64. 32-bit OS architecture is no longer used, and if you do not set the OS architecture, you will see a warning that the repository for 32-bit OS architecture will also be updated every time apt is updated and fails. If you are using Ubuntu 24.04, you need to specify Noble, but if you use the backticks command instead of using the code name directly, the code name will be automatically substituted. I will update apt to reflect the added repository. I will install MariaDB server. The latest stable LTS version of MariaDB is 11.4, but I are installing 11.8 here. 11.4 is suitable for an operating server, but in a development environment, there is a high probability that the latest stable LTS version will have changed when the development is completed and deployed to the server. Since continuous updates are possible when installing through a repository, installing the RC version does not cause any major operational problems. Once the installation is complete, you need to run the MariaDB secure installation command. Since there is no root account password yet, I will press enter. It will ask you whether to authenticate with Unix socket authentication, so I will set it to N. If you set it to authenticate with Unix socket authentication, it will be authenticated when the operating system's execution user is the root account. Please note that from MariaDB 10.4 onwards, if the operating system's execution user is the root account, authentication will be done with Unix socket authentication regardless of the setting. In other words, authentication will be done with the MariaDB root account password only when the operating system's execution user is not the root account. Since the MariaDB root account password is not set, I will press Y. I will enter a new password. I will enter the same password again. I will set the remaining settings according to the environment. Let's run MariaDB monitor to check if it's installed properly. To exit, just type exit. I will install Nginx as a web server. Apache HTTP server has a C10K problem, so the modern Nginx web server is more preferred these days. Also, Apache HTTP server does not have any plans to support HTTP 3 yet, but Nginx is quickly supporting new features. If you install it with the repository provided by default in Ubuntu 24.04, Nginx 1.24 will be installed, but since Nginx 1.25 supports HTTP 3, you need to register an additional repository. However, if you install it with the repository provided by Nginx, the structure of the Nginx configuration directory will be somewhat different, so here I will install it with the repository provided by default in Ubuntu 24.04. I will explain separately how to install the latest Nginx in the PHP-related category. The development IDE tool runs as the logged-in user. In the development environment, you need to change the web server execution user to the logged-in user to implement functions such as file creation programmatically. Personally, I prefer the Vim as a text editor in the CLI environment. The shortcut keys will be shown for unfamiliar users. I will reload Nginx to reflect the changes. Lemp Stack integrates PHP with FPM. When you install PHP-FPM, PHP CLI is also installed. Let's set up the PHP configuration. As mentioned earlier, I personally prefer the Vim editor, but if you are not familiar with it, you can use Nano or GUI text editor. I will cover Vim usage in detail in the Vim text editor category. Let's set the file path to record the error log. Especially in the development environment, the error log is also recorded with the login user's authority, so it is recommended to record the log in a directory owned by the login user account. The time zone is automatically set based on the current location, but when considering web applications that support multiple languages, it may be better to set it to etc. UTC. When outputting the results, you can easily implement it so that it is output in the local time through the time zone option. When storing date information in the DB, while the date type was used a lot in the past, these days it is often stored as varchar in ISO format, and in this case, if a Zulu time zone value is to be stored, it is useful to set it to etc. UTC. I will also change the PHP-FPM execution account to the login user account. I will also change the listening account to the login user account. I will create a directory where PHP logs will be written and set the account ownership to the login user account. I will restart PHP-FPM. Most languages install modules through the package manager of the language and manage them in the project management tool, but PHP usually installs modules through the system package manager, so you need to install PHP modules with apt. When connecting with MariaDB in PHP, you also need to install PHP-MySQL with apt. I will also install the PHP modules that I personally recommend. The curl, zip, XML, GD, MB string modules are almost essential modules that are often used in PHP development, rather than recommended, so I usually install them first and then develop. Nowadays, it is essential to serve web applications with TLS security certificates. If you want to test by applying certificates in the development environment as in the operating server environment, I recommend mkcert. I will download mkcert to the /usr/local/bin directory where the path is set. I will give it execution permission. You also need to install the security tool, which is a bundle of libraries used internally by mkcert. I will install the certificates issued by mkcert for localhost so that browsers recognize them as certificates with root authority signatures. I can create a certificate file for localhost and develop it as a security protocol, but I prefer to develop it similar to the operating environment by adding -dev to the actual operating domain. I will register the domain to be developed in the /etc/host file. It doesn't matter where you create the certificates, but if you create the certificates with Let's Encrypt on the operating server, you can easily change the development environment configuration file to the operating environment configuration file by adjusting the path. Since Let's Encrypt's working directory is /etc/Let's Encrypt, I will create a /etc/mkcert directory. I will grant user account permission and go directly to the path. Let's Encrypt creates the certificates in the archive/domain name directory, but in reality, the symbolic link file of the live/domain name directory is set as the certificates, so I will create a live/gicha.org directory. In the development environment, -dev is added to the actual domain to provide service, but all settings other than the URL address should be set to the actual domain without -dev, so that it is convenient to reflect it to the actual operating server after development is complete. The certificate file names will also match the certificate file names of Let's Encrypt through the key file option in the cert file option. mkcert can also issue certificates for wildcard domains. Since the validity period is 2 years and 3 months, it can be used almost continuously without updates. The final generated files are 2 PEM files. However, if you do not set the chain.pem file with the root authority signature, some browsers may not trust the public key certificate, so it is recommended to use fullchain.pem instead of cert.pem as a public key when registering the certificate. The fullchain.pem file is a certificate file that contains both cert.pem and chain.pem. Since the certificates issued by mkcert are installed to be recognized as certificates with the root authority signature locally, mkcert does not need chain.pem information, but when applying it to the final operating server, there may be a cumbersome task of changing the settings for the fullchain.pem file. The path to the CA root certificate can be found with the CA root option. I will copy the root ca.pem file. Since the path is rather long, I will substitute the result of the previous command with command substitution. This time I will match the file name of Let's Encrypt. I will create a fullchain.pem file by combining cert.pem and chain.pem. A total of 4 PEM files were created. These are file names that are identical to the certificate files of Let's Encrypt. I will install OpenJDK 21, the latest LTS version at this point. If you have installed multiple versions of Java, you can specify the desired version through update alternatives. Currently only one version is installed, but you can check the path where Java is installed. The path is automatically set after installation, so you can use it right away, but some applications implemented in Java or applications using Java may require a Java home to be set in order to run, so I will set the Java home. It will be reflected from the re-login, but I will apply it to the same shell immediately with the source command. I will install Gradle as a project manager for Java projects. In order to install the latest version of Gradle, you must install it with SDKman. If you install Gradle with apt, a very old version will be installed. Currently, Gradle installation is not supported by apt. You can use SDKman from a new session, but if you want to continue working on the terminal you are working on, you can apply the initial settings of SDKman. I will install Gradle with SDK. I will skip managing the actual project with Gradle due to time constraints. If you develop with Java, you will need a compilation task, so you will need a build manager. Nowadays, project managers such as Gradle handle builds, so the need for build managers such as Apache and has decreased. However, Apache and is useful when you need specialized processing for a specific task, so I personally always install it. Of course, if you do not do specialized build tasks, it is not necessary. The runtime language for JavaScript has already established an ecosystem with Node.js, but it is becoming more and more different from the standard ECMA script, so I personally recommend Deno. Deno is a new runtime language created by Ryan Dahl, the original author of Node.js, to improve the gaps between the standard ECMA script and some of the non-modern methods of Node.js and the package management that relies on NPM, as well as security issues regarding file input-output. The Deno execution path is automatically added to the path, but you need to run a new terminal. If you want the path to be reflected in the terminal you are working on, you can directly reflect it in the current shell with the source command. Let's check the Deno version to see if it is reflected well. I will also install Deno, which manages Deno as a daemon. The last upgrade of Deno was in 2022, so the official documentation uses the unstable option, but it is a deprecated option, so it must be removed and installed. The global option has also been changed as necessary. To upgrade Deno, simply give the upgrade option after the Deno command, but this also uses the deprecated unstable option internally. The Deno upgrade command is a Deno reinstallation command, so you must run it by adding the R option to the installation command. Users accustomed to the Windows OS environment may find working on Ubuntu unfamiliar and inconvenient, but there is no need to search for, download, and install development-related applications one by one, and there is no excessive resource cost for graphics, so it can be installed quickly. Even though I installed the web server and PHP, etc., the work was completed much faster than working on Windows. Here I installed it by typing directly and explaining it, but if I had copied and pasted the command and executed it without explanation, the development environment setup would have been completed more quickly. Thank you for watching.